Okay, so I feel like we need to pull back the lens a little bit and really get into the definition of what exactly anti-Zionism is. And I'm gonna just to answer one of your first contentions, because this is always one I take issue with, um, regardless of who I'm having this conversation with. But there's a difference between being anti-Zionist before 1948 and being anti-Zionist after 1948. And the very simple reason is because after 1948, the state of Israel exists. After 1948, there is a political community of sovereign Jews in the Middle East who have their own flag, their own anthem, their own state. And so rather, Shani Moore, who's a Israeli writer, made a really good point about this in one of his pieces for the Forward, kind of trite point. He said, there's a difference between being in a Vienna cafe in 1920, arguing that a Jewish state was probably not the best course of action for the Jewish people, intellectually talking about that, something that would exist in the future, hypothetical. And then I'm, paraphrasing this article, saying, well, I'm a 20-year-old college student drinking a pumpkin spice latte in the Upper West Side, advocating for the destruction of an already existing political sovereign community. So those are just two differences there. We can't really compare anti-Zionism before 1948 and Zionism after 1948. That's kind of the reason of, let's say you and a spouse are looking about having a kid, thinking about having children. Before you have those children, you can decide all day and all night whether or not it is the right thing to do to have those children. But then once the children are born, you can no longer decide if it's okay to have those children because they're already here. They're already in existence. So, but let's move back and discuss what anti-Zionism is.
Okay, I just want to take umbrage, I feel, with some of the language you said there. So you made a distinction between Zionism pre-state and Zionism post-state of Israel. And okay, I get what you're understanding. When you use the word destruction, though, and I'm not saying you're doing this maliciously, but that word conjures up imagery of terrorism, the Holocaust, violence, just nasty stuff. But when people say, for instance, that, and look, you can agree or disagree with the merits of this, but when people say that they want Israel to be a binational state of Jews and Palestinians, and I guess in a sense, you could say it's being destroyed. Israel would be destroyed in the sense of being a majority Jewish voting state, but it's not the same as genocide or ethnic cleansing. That's not what reasonable people, and yes, there are anti-Semitic anti-Zionists, but that's not who we're talking about right now. I'm saying that's not what reasonable people support. So I think to use that language is a bit disingenuous. And I'm gonna say this right now, and I'm just gonna preface it, but I'm not saying these situations are one-to-one the same. But it would be the equivalent of white South Africans saying in the apartheid era that Nelson Mandela wanted to destroy South Africa. Well, did he? Well, in a sense, I guess he did, in the sense he wanted to fundamentally remake it, but he did not support the killing of white people. As a matter of fact, he set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and he granted a lot of clemency to some really nasty criminals under the apartheid regime. And again, I'm not calling Israel, I'm not saying it's the same exact thing as South Africa, but I hope you can get the point that wanting to fundamentally change a state is not ipso facto bigoted or supportive of violence. That's what I'm trying to get across.
That's an incredibly naive point to have, a view to have. There's this really interesting phenomenon that happens in the West, mainly within white Western leftist circles, that tries to prescribe problems to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that both Israelis and Palestinians know are completely ridiculous. You cannot look at this region of the world that is so horribly divided by religion, by ethnicity, by political attachment, by nationalist movements, by socialist movements, and say that a binational solution in a place like Israel-Palestine will work without chaos, without.
But how is that inherently? I'm sorry to interrupt. How is that inherently anti-Semitic? Like that's fine. You want to debate them. I'm not necessarily arguing for a binational state, but how is that necessarily anti-Semitic?
I will tell you how it's necessarily anti-Semitic. So anti-Zionism is the belief that of that out of all of the nationalist movements in the world, out of all of these independent nation states that arose in the 20th century, only one has no right to exist in its current form. Only one state's misdeeds and transgressions invalidate its entire existence. Only one nationalist movement is so deviant, so demonic, so satanic that it deserves to be purged from the earth entirely because of its nature. And what do we ask ourselves is its nature? Jewish. Anti-Zionists will assure you that no, Zionism is not like the other national liberation movements. Zionism is white supremacy. Zionism is apartheid akin to South Africa. Zionism is racism. Zionism is genocide. And now we begin to understand the connection between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is an irrational obsession with the Jews as a collective people. Anti-Semitism throughout history has been characterized as a community attaching what they believe to be the most reprehensible qualities on the face of the earth to the idea of the Jewish people in order to demonize them, strip Jews of their protections and defenses, push Jews to the fringes of society, and ultimately erase Jews from the globe. None of these accusations and labels have ever been based in fact, but rather in conspiracy theory. Anti-Zionism simply says that the same respect and validity that is given to every other nation, yes, regardless of what this nation does that we might not approve of, does not apply to Jews.